Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Bourne. Look, I would love for you to help us spread the word about this podcast by leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And we want to welcome the over 70 plus countries listening from around the world. Today, we want to welcome Lithuania. Well, my guest today is Alex Svinov, and Alex is the CEO and co-founder of Insquad. It's the platform that helps to build remote teams, and these are remote development teams. He believes that the future of work is remote teams. And this is a notion that will radically change the world as it brings opportunity and talent closer to each other. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Hello to everybody. Thanks for having me here.
Well, I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about your founding backstory. So why did you found Insquad, and what was the heart behind or the reason behind founding a team like this?
Insquad is not my first startup. I've been in a startup since maybe 2015. It's my actually it's my fifth company that I have founded. And in my previous startup, we had a big challenge of building a cool team of software engineers. And at some point, it ended up at the point where I could literally find no quality talents locally. So what could I do? Start to go remote and start to go to the staffing firms. And it still took a lot of time to interview the guys, to find the right engineers. And just in time, I would find somebody who would be a great engineer. They would, get offers from lots of companies that would pay them higher price, or give them some perks. So I felt that for a startup, it is really hard to find talents locally, and that's why we started sourcing remotely. That's why we went to all remote locations like Latin America, Europe, Asia, and found lots of great talents there. And we felt that we could really help the startup community. Those folks out there who are starting today, who are thinking about building their software engineering team, and saving on that, and that's kind of how it all put together.
Well, I know there's lots of pros and cons to hiring remote workers. One of the ones that you leaned into is just the ability to find phenomenal talent anywhere. I'm sure there are some downsides or some challenges to this as well. I would love for you to contrast kind of what are the pros and cons of just remote work in general and hiring people remotely.
Well, first of all, remote work. I mean, COVID taught us all how to manage teams remotely, but it was still, managing teams within your own culture. So you would all go out of office, but you would still be with the same people that you were working previously, and you would have the same culture, the same work ethics, and so on and so forth. And with the true remote work, where you say you are in Atlanta and you hire somebody in Sao Paulo, or in India, you've got a lot of things to consider, right? How to find the engineers out there. I mean, they're instruments to find personnel that you're used to, and obviously these are instruments very much different locations. How to vet these engineers? This has a lot to do with the culture and work ethics. How to manage all these cultural differences, because we've seen so many issues when you would try to hire somebody from a different location, and the person would have a completely different expectations, and it just would make work really hard, right? So how do you manage these cultural differences? How do you manage remote workers in general? I mean, again, it has to do with the time zone issues. It has to do with with the fact that you've never seen this person in real life, and and you don't really know what is the background context that he's living or he or she is living in. It's getting harder to also to have you know to have like informal one-on-ones, having some coffee that you would typically have with somebody at office, and you see that person is not performing or something's going wrong. You could do that with the remote workers. It's an issue. And of course, there is legal tax and all that organizational issues that pile on top of that. So there are lots of issues that you have to overcome to be a truly remote team.
Wow. It's interesting just to hear you talk about some of those. I even think about, you kind of pressed in on this a little bit, but we'll spend a little more time here because I think it's just an interesting topic of even just cultural norms. I remember when we spun up a development team in India, and whenever we'd be on a conference call with them, this is like we had video, but this was kind of before we would be commonly on video. You were more just on conference calls, and I can remember our team in Atlanta would ask a question to our team in Bangalore. And it would seem like it took forever to get a response. And we were wondering, like, what's going on over there? And when I went to visit the team, what I noticed was, because now we're all sitting in a conference room together, I noticed that whenever I asked a question, they would all think about their insights and they would pass it on to the leader. And then the leader would respond. And there's all these like cultural norms that sometimes we don't necessarily get because we're not in the room with the people that we hire. And so we're having to work harder to understand one another and to get on the same page, which I think is a really interesting facet of remote work, especially cross culturally.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought it on because we had so many so many stories about, the things that are for us in US. It's a very typical thing. If you ask somebody, that person responds. For example, in India, we also had a team that would, that would ask them to, bring in the ideas, and they would never bring anything in. They would only, do whatever we said them to. But ultimately, so I asked the team leader, what could we do to actually motivate the team to bring in the ideas? Because in software engineering, you cannot build a great team, or you cannot build a great product, which is managed top down, right? It has to go bottom up. So ultimately, it was a very simple thing. We actually stopped asking ourselves, but we asked team leader to ask the team the same questions. And when he did that, they would start answering.
Mhm.
And it turned out to be that there was, this was just a fascinating moment. I remember it when one of the guys, when we asked, okay, so what we could improve in our process, and when we asked, obviously they didn't answer, but when the team leader asked, and one of the guys took out the notepad and he had 15 points that he actually has written down. He had thought about that. He thought that, we could improve this and that, but he would never give it, he would never raise the hand and get out loud up until the point when his leader has actually asked that. So there are a number of things that you just have to keep in mind. And it's like, if you're building a team, especially when you're going for a location like King. But again, once you've it's only a limited number of those. And when you've, set up the process, and when you learn how to overcome these difficulties, all of those teams start to perform.
I love that example. And I think it just drives home that different countries have just different hierarchical ways that they're comfortable working. And oftentimes, especially I only have an American background, so I can only speak to that. But as an American, we kind of come in and try to relate to people in an American way versus understanding the way that that culture relates to one another, to leaders, and especially leaders that are a few levels removed, where that power distance may play into the whole equation. And so it's so important that we don't just step into these things lightly, but we really understand cultural norms and things like that as we start to create and build teams. And I just love that example. Um, I want to turn the table and talk a little bit about just how, what's the right word? Many companies, I just read just recently, right, that Starbucks had told their people to come back to work, and they wrote an open letter to the executives and they were very unhappy about it. And of course, we're not talking about, Starbucks um, baristas, we're talking about Starbucks corporate. But the idea, right, is that right now many corporations are calling their colleagues, right, calling their employees back to work. And after um, employees have tasted what it's like to have flexibility, to have the ability to work remotely, many are reluctant and not wanting to come back into the office. And I would love to spend a little bit of time just talking about the dynamic as we think about the future of work and how remote work plays into this whole equation.
Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer in a remote work, and in my case, it has been in COVID that has taught me that remote workers can actually deliver great results. Because before that, my engineering teams, some of the people would often ask, "Hey, can we take some time to work remotely?" And I was very hard pressing on that because I felt that we're going to lose the team spirit, we're going to lose the traction, we're going to lose that feeling of a shoulder that that drives a lot of people to achieve a lot of things. But what happened when we all had to go remotely? The teams have changed, and those guys, teams that were really uh, pushing hard on working remotely, they started to perform just well. Just they doubled their performance. Turned out to be that they had a very comfortable place where they could work. They had, they really enjoyed what they were doing, so they delivered great results. There were some people that couldn't do that. And those we had to ultimately call back into the office or to let them go because they could not, put themselves together at home, because it certainly takes a lot of internal effort and focus not not to be distracted. Ultimately, I think that remote work does what nothing else could ever do. It brings you so much more resources available. For example, if you are starting today in startup in San Francisco, and if you want to hire only people from the valley, then you are limited to the you have so much demand and you have no supply, and you have to pay huge salaries, and then you also have workers that spend maybe a year, 2 years at your place, and then they switch. And with at the same time, you've got so many talents out there that do not have these opportunities, and they are ready to offer the services that you are looking for. So, of course, you can, if you're a big corporation, if you're a Starbucks, of course, you can do that. You can allow yourself to do that. But if you're a smaller startup, and you need to really try try to find the most efficient way to grow and to conserve resources and to motivate people. I just don't see how you would go. You would pass by the remote work model, because it just brings so much on the table.
Yeah, I feel like startup or large organization, we have felt that press for talent, right? That challenge to get the knowledge worker. And so I believe that in order for people to be successful long term, they're going to have to look at this remote option as a real option, sometimes the only viable option. But in addition to that, I do think that there are organizations that would say, hybrid work is working effective for them as well, where potentially they're offering a few days in the office and then a few days from home. I think regardless of what that looks like, I do think that the knowledge worker is moving to a place really in this next season, of course, where they get to choose. And I mean, we went from this idea of work from home to the idea of work from anywhere. And I don't know that we can just put that back in a box and say, hey, everybody come back to the office now, when we've kind of, we saw so many people moving right over the pandemic to say, hey, I was always tied to this location because I had to come into work. But now that I'm working remote, I can really live anywhere and do this. And so it's really a revolution of rethinking the way that we think about work.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, it's also the fact that you could just plug in so much more resources that are out there immediately and, have and become more competitive because ultimately, if you are only, using the resources at home, whereas your competitors are using resources from the entire world, it's like, you're riding a bicycle and somebody else is driving a Tesla right next to you. Well, guess who's going to do his job faster, right? It's pretty much the same thing.
Well, what would you say are misconceptions about remote work? I do feel like there are some misconceptions out there when we think about this idea of remote work. What would you say the top two or three would be?
Well, number one that we see a lot of times is that uh, uh, people think that remote workers are never as good as the guys that get into the office. That a lot of people still think that if the person is in the office, then he or she works, and if the person is not in the office, we don't really know. Maybe he's doing whatever he wants to do, having another job or something, and it has a lot to do with the fact that I want to control the people that are in my office, and and now we see a lot of companies that have never had a single office, and they build great businesses like GitHub. There are companies that are worth billions and billions and are doing billions in revenues and have thousands of people, and they never ever had a single office. I think that this fact alone proves that you can build remote teams. Even to add more to that, best teams that I've seen, they were remote because again, when you have talents that you can choose from anywhere and have your team match exactly, what the needs of the team are, then you can then you can build a team that is so much more powerful than the one that choose from all the guys that are available here at the office. That's one thing. Another misconception is it is very hard to manage remote teams. Now, this has a lot to do with the cultural differences and with the time zone differences and with the organizational and legal and tax issues that I talked before. But again, it's like, you always knew how to use a fork, and now you have to learn how to use a spoon. And once you've learned it, once you've mastered it, it's pretty much the same, right? People everywhere in the world have the very much similar motivation to create great things, to work in teams and to produce something. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, we all, when we're off work, we can spend our time differently. We have very different, lives and different cultures. But when we're doing something together, when we're putting together a new product or, something, doing something new, it is people tend to work in a very similar fashions, different areas of the world. So it's very easy to just learn cultural differences. Once you've learned that, once you've set up the processes to adjust to that, once you've done your a little bit of your homework to understand how the people these remote locations actually do work, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah, I love that. Talk a little bit about your hiring process. I mean, we talked about, it's a little different, right? When someone can walk through your door for an interview and you can sit down with them or take them to coffee and you get to kind of really quickly get a feel for, who they are, what they're like, kind of their way of communicating. Talk a little bit about how can remote hiring be done efficiently and successfully?
Well, I think I believe in processes in a sense that the more you have things, the more you have the standardized processes, to the more power you have to leverage the opportunities of remote work. What I mean is that, for example, in our case, every developer that comes to our platform has to go through a number of tests, and then we have obviously our AI, our algorithms to evaluate the skills. But then, of course, we have for every developer, we have a internal recruiter to go through that person's profile to have a little informal chat. That's and by building this process, uh, we are always certain that at the end we are having only the candidates that we feel are right for our platform. The guys that have certain number of skills, the guys that are motivated to work in a startup, the guys that have good communication skills. So it's more like you're building a checklist, right? It is always a question of a checklist. And of course, like in any hiring you can do, there can be a hiring error, but it's, nobody, nobody can live without that. But when you're doing the process and when you're adhering to that process strictly, you can be certain that the quality level is going to be super high.
Yeah, that's good. I love the just kind of the, hey, there's a methodical way to think about this. There's a methodical way to walk through this and make sure that it's a good fit on both sides. Um, as we kind of enter our final thoughts, I would love for you just to take a moment and think about, what does the future of work look like over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see kind of coming on the horizon for remote work and just work in general?
I think that the world is, especially today in 2023, when we've got all this new technology with the AI and chat GPT and with hype, and I'm sure that that is going to bring a lot more new on the table. We are definitely looking into a future where we have talents that are scattered all over the world and that are working wherever they would like to work. And obviously, having companies that are looking for best and the hiring the best talents from anywhere in the world. And I think this is going to be the main notion that is just going to change, evolve and change the way people think. Because a lot of people right now are talking about coming back to the office, like you said. And to me, it's more like, we kind of we all been in COVID times. We've all been locked down in our apartments. Now we need to get back and, kind of refuel that have that feeling back. But the reality is that, people have adjusted to that and now people enjoy working from anywhere. We got a lot of guys that are, that have been coming to our office, California, but now they are sitting somewhere in, in Latin America, from the uh, some ocean or something. I don't know. And they are, they're enjoying doing the same work that they've done in office, but remotely. And this is where I see it going forward. I also think that with AI, we're gonna see a lot more simple tasks automated, and a lot more senior developers demanded for, or senior tech personnel demanded in the new tasks, and a lot less of the um, junior level engineering skills. So people would need to learn more, and of course, with learning more, you would be specializing more. So we're going to have a lot more technical specialties. Like when I first started, I'm a computer graduate, so when I first started, there were like 3 or 4 programming languages. That was it. Right now, 20 years later, there's like 20 programming languages and frameworks, and I think there's more and more and more, and it's going to be way more specialized. And just finding the right talent that would have all the technologies that you're looking for is going to be impossible unless you are, plugging in the entire world work. So
Yeah.
that's where I see it.
Wow. I love that final thought. That was really profound. I love listening to where you're seeing this going. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Head over to the show notes. You can follow Alex. You can go over to insquad.com and then also follow him on LinkedIn as well. Well, remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.